Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. My name is Hai. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Prioritization. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I do want to mention that the webinar is recorded, and then we'll post it afterwards. And then at the same time, in the chat section there, you have the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have, and I'll try my best to address them as we go through the call. Hopefully you're here today because you want to learn about Matrix and how it can help you become more effective and more productive, able to understand what your priorities are, what you should be working on. And so with that, our focus today is on giving you that introduction so you get the most out of Matrix. I have a couple of goals. One, help you understand the basics of Matrix, the idea behind it, why it exists. And then second, provide you a framework for you to get the most out of PM with the least work. And what I mean by that is, what are the capabilities in Matrix that you should leverage today in order to become more effective? And then help you envision what your work and life success looks like with Matrix. I first want to start with the challenges that customers like you face. So over the years, I've talked to thousands of customers, interviews thousands as well. And one of the things that I hear on a recurring basis is that one, team members have trouble understanding what's priority right now. And the reason for that is because we have so many things that's on our plate. And so the second part is that with all these responsibilities, it's actually really hard to keep track on the status of work across these areas of responsibilities. As you know, you're no longer working on one project, you're working on multiple projects at any point in time. And then the third part is that emails and meetings are just causing too much context switching. Over the last couple of years, there's been so many more software in terms of communication, allowing you to send messages in Teams or it's getting chat messages or emails, etc. And that's actually causing us to be pulled in so many different directions, and actually it's a major distraction. So what is Prioritization? Prioritization is a comprehensive email priority and project management software designed to help teams manage emails, conduct more efficient meetings, and get real-time status updates on critical projects and priorities. You can think of Prioritization as a communication tool. At the end of the day, that's what it is. A communication tool that helps you communicate priorities, not just to yourself, but also to others around you. So how does Prioritization tackle these three challenges that I mentioned? First, we use what's called the 4-quadrant methodology, which I'll go into more details, to promote effective prioritization. And the idea behind there is to keep everyone on the same page. So then when you start your day, you know exactly what you need to work on. Secondly, we provide many different views, such as the one-on-one agenda, timeline, so that you can get the right information in front of you with the right context. And when I talk about context, it means, for example, what project am I working on today? What task do I have to get done today? Or who am I doing this for, right? Is it your coworker? Is it your manager? Is it your direct report? Is it for a client? And Matrix gives you that insight. Thirdly, because of all these software that we use, Matrix provide really deep integrations into Microsoft Teams and Outlook for very effective email and task prioritization. So I'll show you how to turn an email into a task and be able to triage that and delegate that to the appropriate people, so then you're not losing track of those important emails that are coming to your inbox. So what makes Matrix different? First, it's a Microsoft 365 security certified solution, and it's the only one that's certified across the web app, Teams app, and Outlook app. We're actually leveraging AI more and more to help you achieve your goals. It's something I'm very excited about. That, there's not many practical applications of AI, but I think that we actually have a really interesting one that you can use literally from the moment you start using Matrix. We also provide what I call people-centric collaboration. So it's not just about project management. So I'm sure you've looked at so many task management software out there, so many project management software out there. You have your paper and that you're writing all these notes on, but Matrix takes all of that and actually can give you the insight on what matters given the context that you work in. And then finally, Matrix is available as a SaaS solution, which is what I'll go through today, as well as a HIPAA compliance for healthcare and life sciences, as well as an Azure government cloud, as well as managed private Azure deployments. If any of these other capabilities interest you, definitely reach out to us. So let's talk about the basics of Matrix. There's a quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." What I really like about this quote is it talks about the dimensions of importance and urgency. And what really is at stake here is that on a daily basis, we're being pulled away from what really is important by the urgent things, right? So that last email you got, that text messages you just received, that Teams chat that's your manager just sent you. The reality is they pull you away from your current task, but they don't necessarily move you towards doing what matters most. And at the end of the day, being able to differentiate that is really, really important. And at the same time, I'm sure so many of you have goals. In your back of your head, you're thinking, oh, my goal this year might be to get a promotion or get a raise or to win more customers, etc. And yet at the same time, the tasks that you work on don't necessarily align with those goals. And by the way, if that happens to you, you're not the only one. And if it doesn't, then you're good. You don't need Matrix. So how does it work? Imagine if you took all the tasks that you have to do, and instead of actually just writing in one long linear list, I asked you to separate them into these 4 buckets. The buckets of do now, the things that really are important and urgent that you have to work on. And then the things you should plan for next, and the things you should delegate to somebody else who can actually do a better job than you. And then finally, the stuff that you don't, sort of back burner, the stuff that you're not ready to process yet, but sort of your ideation phase. And now imagine that you can only have 25% of the things that you can do be in quadrant 1, right? Because if everything's important and urgent, then nothing is. So think about the tasks that you have to do today, this week, this month, and put it within this context. Especially if you have some critical projects that you're working on, what are the things that will actually make the most impact? And then here's the second thing that I want you to do, which is once you have this list created, this matrix created rather, walk around the office and start comparing notes. Would your manager agree with you on all these priorities that you've written down for project A? Would your clients agree with you for all these priorities you've written down for whatever deliverables that you have to do for them? Would your family agree on your priorities if you were to show your spouse this and say, hey, by the way, like this is what I think is important within our family? And it's such a fascinating exercise because the whole goal about this is identifying discrepancy. It is so incredibly hard to do this exercise of prioritization because we are so inclined to put everything in a list and just go down the list and start checking them off. But what happens is that if we don't split it into those dimensions, those very, very basic dimensions, it's very difficult to communicate to others what we really think are priorities. And so the Priority Matrix software creates alignment because it forces you to prioritize from this moment. And what's really interesting is that success from using Priority Matrix isn't about finding what everyone agrees on. So when you walk around the office and you're comparing notes and you're showing your manager your Priority Matrix, you're showing your teammates your Priority Matrix, what happens is if everyone agrees on everything, that's not that interesting because then you're all set. You don't need any software. You just got to go and work on those things that you have to do. But instead, it's about discovering disagreements. And my argument is that if Priority Matrix can help you identify one critical project that was not prioritized correctly, then we've added a ton of value and we've earned, the value that the software provides. So keep that in the back of your mind. That's not the most obvious thing about Priority Matrix because people sometimes look at Priority Matrix as a software to manage tasks. Don't look at it that way. Look at Priority Matrix as a communication tool that creates alignment within your team and organization. Couple of things, the webinar is recorded and will be posted there. And so, we'll do other webinars as well. We do a lot of introduction to webinars, but more than happy to do other webinars that's more tailored. And so we do have that for some customers. But if you're interested in certain topics, reach out to me. I would love your feedback. And then at the same time, we'll just see if other topics we can cover. So now with that, I'm going to jump into Priority Matrix. As I mentioned, use the chat to send me messages so that I'm aware if there's any questions or anything you want me to go into more details. Okay, so here I have Priority Matrix open. What I have here, you should see on my screen, is the web application of Priority Matrix. And as you can see, I have a project selected. And within this project, I have the 4 quadrants, similar to what I showed you from the Eisenhower Matrix. I have the do now, the do later, the delegate, and postpone. So everything that I create in Matrix has to fit within these 4 quadrants. And it's so interesting because the hardest part when you write down a task in Matrix is where does it go, right? Again, if everything goes into quadrant 1, then you're constantly fighting fires. That means you're not actually go and determining where you should best focus your time. So what I personally like to do is I like to always write something first in quadrant 4. So for example, let's say I want to go and read a new book to improve my personal time management. Okay, so when I create a task like this here, now it's a very trivial task, but when you're creating a task, just think about the context of what it is that you're creating. So for example, if the project was, again, some work that you have to do for a customer, for a client, then those tasks might be very different. But here's one thing I'm going to do differently than just this task. I'm going to say due in 2 weeks. So the way it works with Priority Matrix is that when you create a task and you write something like due in 2 weeks, we use what's called natural language to interpret that and set the due date for you. So when I created this task, it opens what's called the item details on the right-hand side. You can think of the item details as a way to elaborate on the task, add more metadata to it. So then you have some details around that. And so you know the context, right? Because a simple task is not enough, especially you have additional information around it. So in the item details, I can see what project it belongs in, and I can move it to another project if needed. I can star a task, which means I can say that this is high priority, and it's just very visual for me to see that. I can assign an icon to it. I can change the task name if needed. And then down a little bit further, this is actually something that are more relevant if you start working with team members. You can assign an owner. So obviously this is a personal priority, so I'm not assigning this to anybody, but then you have progress, effort, reminder, dates. So you saw how I set a due date, but what's really interesting, the difference between reminder and due date is that if you have something due in 2 weeks, but let's say it takes a little bit of time to do, and you wait for 2 weeks to get started, you're not going to get that done. So think of reminder as something that actually surfaces up this task again to remind you to get started on it, even when the due date is farther out. Example, I have tasks to follow up with some customers 1 year out. So I don't know how you track your tasks today that are much, much further out. You know, do you add it to your calendar or anything along those lines? The problem is, in order to follow up with that customer in a year, I want to actually get reminded 10 months out. So the way it would work for me is I would go and set that due date really far out and then set a reminder. And it's so powerful because Matrix goes and remind me, and I'm able to get in the right context when the due date gets close. So I'm going to go ahead and say remind me daily, right? And so now I have a task that's due in 2 weeks, but I'm going to get a daily reminder. I absolutely love reminder. Going back to the basics of Party Matrix, if how you use Party Matrix, I always recommend you set due dates and you always set reminders. And when you do that, Party Matrix becomes much more powerful and intelligent and surfaces up the right task for you. And so as you can see, when I go down a little bit more, I have a chat section. And that's what I just did. I typed in a chat message. But the chat message is more than just chat. The chat message is history of all the changes within this task. When you're working with another coworker, for example, the chat provides one central place for you to communicate to each other within the context of the task. Let me explain what that means. For example, let's say you got an email about a certain task, and then you reply to that email, right? And now you have a thread. And so you're going back and forth on that task that you have to work on. Well, you can think of this as the exact same thing, but instead of an email thread, you have a single item that you're tracking that conversation for. Where it's useful is if you need to bring on somebody else who's going to take over the task, or you need to actually have someone review the changes, or in a year, you want to look back and see what were the record of all the things that we did, the due dates, etc. So Party Matrix provide that history for you automatically. It works well even on an individual basis as well, because when I create a task, what happens is Party Matrix track when that's created, and when I mark it as done, Party Matrix will tell me how long it took me to get that task done. So look at that from that perspective. It's a lot more powerful than if you go into, send a text message and asking about the status of things, or if you go to, Teams and chat there, etc. So use Party Matrix chat for that purpose. The second is notes. When you look at notes, the intention here is not to replace your Microsoft Word or Google Docs, etc. Notes is just for you to track some bullet points or some subtasks directly here. And then finally, the resource section is where you can actually add a lot more information to the task itself, everything from files to links, etc. So that, in essence, are the information that you have within a task. Now, there's a lot more things you can do, including creating dependencies and so forth. But for the purpose of this webinar, we don't have to go into that. But if you need those capabilities, it's always there. So I showed you how I created a task in the quadrant 4, but I always mention that if you want things to get done, move them to quadrant 1. So now I can take this and drag it up and I can easily prioritize. So for those who are visual, so if you love being visual, Matrix provide a very powerful way to see those priorities so easily. Because when I look at my quadrants right here, you see how obvious it is to myself that, okay, these are the things I need to work on. These are the things that I need to start considering. What are the things I should work on next, etc. So now let me jump to a different project, for example. Let's say my team priorities. So when I open a project, what happens on the right-hand side here, this project details open. So we talk about item details. Project details is where you can actually customize information around the project itself. So you can see that I can also star a project. I can actually associate to various user groups such as departments or marketing, sales, engineering, etc. Or I can actually invite people to this project. For example, you should go and create a project and you can invite your manager or your direct reports. So now everyone has one project where when they go into Matrix, they can see all the priorities and everyone can be on the same page. As I mentioned earlier, Matrix is a communication tool. So what you want to do is you want to communicate to everyone else what your priorities are. And in order to do that, you actually have to prioritize first. And then second, you can go and actually make those critical decisions and shift things around. One single piece of best practice that I want to share with you is that if you create this matrix and you write down all the important tasks that you have and you prioritize them, and when you're in a meeting, for example, and you project that on the big screen and everyone just talks about it and looks at the matrix together and talk about it, you're going to get so much value. If you do that single exercise, I think you're going to find that you'll get alignment across the team so quickly. As you scroll down more on the right-hand side here, you have the ability to customize the quadrants, the colors, everything around the project itself. I showed you the Eisenhower Matrix as a getting started, but the reality is it's actually, Matrix has hundreds, literally hundreds of templates. Anything that fits within a 2x2 matrix, right? Effort, impact, essentially dimensions that can have a low, a high, etc. And so Matrix gives you that customization. And so when you're working with a client, or again, when you're working on a construction project, or you're working on self-improvement, you can customize these dimensions as needed. The whole idea is the visualization, and that's key. So as you can see, I have some different terminology here, P1, P2, P3. Now, one thing that's really neat about Matrix is the ability to save all of this as templates. So let's just say within your organization, or just even for yourself, once you created the various templates, the various matrices, and you've customized the colors and so forth, you can go to this top right here and save the project as template. The neat thing about being able to save something as a template is that it shares it within your team so that others can actually launch Matrix from those templates as well. Let me give you a use case. Let's just say if you have a client onboarding process where you have 16 things you have to do for them and you have them prioritized already and along with all the due dates and so forth. When you save that whole project as a template, Matrix will go and save all those tasks as well. And then when you bring on a new client, you launch from the template, set the start date, and everything else plays out. And all your due dates are automatically created from the moment you have the start date. It works for employee onboarding. It works for new customer onboarding. It works for any repeated processes that you have within your organization. So really check out that capability from a template standpoint. Okay, so what I've shown you is the ability to go and create tasks and customize them. I've shown you how to go and customize a project. Let me show you what creating a project is like in Matrix. So as you can see in the web app here, I just go click plus project. When I choose a new project, I have several options. The first, I can do a blank project. which is straightforward. It's just an empty matrix, 2x2 matrix, and you can choose what kind of template it is. But the second is actually I can choose template that I have within the organization. Like I mentioned earlier, employee onboarding or something like that. And then we have what's called public templates. These are some templates that we've selected to make available for you that you can launch from. For example, 30, 60, 90-day plan for managers, right? That allows you to have a whole new template if you're a manager to use that and then be able to leverage Party Matrix for those specific purposes. Now, as I mentioned, we actually have hundreds of templates that's available on our website. But one really exciting area that we've invested our time and effort into is actually helping you create templates using artificial intelligence. And so here, the option create with AI, what it does, it lets you take a goal and turn that into a task. So for example, here you see how I have the option, a couple of ideas, but elevate the company's IT infrastructure. Well, what I've just done is when I choose to create a project like that, what our system does is Party Matrix will go and leverage AI to help you build out those action items, help you prioritize them, help you look for the dimensions that are appropriate to create those projects. And then we'll go and we'll share that with you. So then you can use that as a baseline in order to get started more quickly. Party Matrix cannot do those tasks for you yet. But the whole idea here is that we want to give you a head start as quickly as possible. Some of the goals that I really like is one, how do I get a promotion this quarter? Or two, how do I improve my communication skills? Right? So those are the things that you can type into Party Matrix as goal, and Party Matrix will generate matrices with action items that helps you tackle those. I'm going to go ahead and press close here. So you see, actually, I ran a previous goal, and so I can go ahead and open that action plan here when Party Matrix says that it's ready. And it's actually, in fact, the other goal just finished as well. And so when I open up this project, you can see that actually uses a very different dimension, effort and impact. And so this entire project was generated by our artificial intelligence to help you tackle whatever goal it is. In this case, improve marketing reach. So that's how Party Matrix project creation system works. You can have a blank page. You can have one that actually leverages all these AI capabilities. Now, let me step back and talk about email management. The reason is it's something that all of us struggle with. And in fact, a lot of customers come to us because they struggle with emails. So let me jump into Outlook here. So when you go to Outlook, one of the things you can do is you can install Party Matrix. So if you were to go to if you were to install Party Matrix for Outlook, what you have now is, let's just say you have an email. So after you install Party Matrix, remember, Party Matrix works separately for Teams and Outlook. So you do have to install those applications separately in addition to our web app. But when I have an email, let's just say if I want to prioritize it, what do? You probably flag it right now, right? And that's what a lot of us do. That's what I still do, and for better or worse. But the problem I have with flag emails is it works great if I have 5 flags email. It does not work so well if I have 50 or 100 flag emails. So what Party Matrix allows me to do is take any email and convert it into a task. So when we talk about triaging an email, it's really about taking an email, prioritizing it, delegating to appropriate people, could be yourself, as well as setting the due date on that email. So then you can actually get back to the email, make sure that you respond to it. And if it's an important customer email, you're there to answer that email at the right time. So let's just say I have this email here. I can click on this ellipsis. And when I go down to Party Matrix, I have the option to prioritize this email. And as you can see, when I prioritize this email, the item name is the subject of the email itself, but I can override this and write something else. I can choose what project this belongs in, and I can choose what quadrant it belongs in. Now, imagine if this email is extremely important and I want to delegate to a team member. Well, guess what? I can choose that appropriate project, and then I can choose the appropriate person directly from here, and I can say due next week, and then click capture email. So with just those few clicks, I'm able to ensure that my teammates get the task, it's prioritized within the appropriate quadrants in the appropriate project. I assign to the person, and I've really set the due date so it's very clear on when they need to look at it and that they need to respond by a certain date. When I forward an email, let's imagine if I forward an email, what I don't know is I don't know if my coworker is going to get that email. I don't know if they're aware that they have to get it done on a certain date, et cetera, right? And then if they get it done, how do I know that I actually got it done? With Matrix, when you delegate an email like that, you now have a record of that task. And that person can go, your coworker can go and open the email, respond to it. And if they mark it as done, then voila, everything is recorded, and you ensure that that customer email or that really important email from your executive is not lost. So that's how Matrix works when it comes to email prioritization. But one of the things that's really neat about Matrix too is if I have an email and actually I have a task that already exists to handle that email, I can actually open Matrix instead, right? And instead of actually creating a whole task from that email, I can attach an email to an existing task. And so when I open here, you see I have the ability to search. And from this search, I can just hover over an existing task and attach an email to an existing task. Let me show you, explain to you some use cases. Imagine again, if you are a consultant and you work with many external customers, and each of those customers, you might have a different project for each of them. And within those projects, you have a lot of tasks for those customers. Well, when you have an email that comes from that client, you can take that email, create a task from it within the appropriate client project. But then at the same time, if it's the customer's asking for a follow-up, you can now go and take that email and attach it to the task that you're already working on. And now everyone's on the same page, and you have one central place that's tracking all these emails and all these tasks together. And what's really neat about it is all your coworkers, your teammates, and so forth are aligned because they get to see the emails as well. They see the status of that work. So that's how the email management side aspect of Matrix works. Now, one thing I want to show you next is actually how Matrix tie into Microsoft Teams. So we're probably the most integrated solution in Teams because we just leverage all the capabilities that Microsoft provides. And so as you can see, when I open Microsoft Teams here, you can go to the App Store, install Matrix, and when you sign in with your account, all the information that you have across all your accounts is synchronized together in one central place, which means if you're on the mobile device, you can access this. And as you update it, it updates your Microsoft Teams app. It's just very, very convenient. What I like about the Microsoft Teams integrations is that Matrix is there without you having to switch context. I mean, there's data out there that shows on a daily basis, all of us switch apps so often because we use one app to chat, one app to manage work, one app to actually get work done, one app to respond to emails, etc. So Matrix goes and actually just works again inside Outlook, but inside Teams too. So then you can actually stay inside Teams. So you can see that if you go to the Teams App Store, install Matrix, one thing I recommend is right click on here and then pin Matrix. So then Matrix is available for you to access right here on the left-hand side. The views, once you sign in, looks almost identical to your web app. And so then you know that it's consistent in terms of experience. The only difference is the menu is actually up here. So you can still go up here to create project, and you can still go up here to search through your project, to look at your calendar, etc., from one central place. But there's a couple of capabilities in Matrix that actually is very unique to the Teams ecosystem. So for example, when you go to a chat with a coworker, so let me show you what it means. So let's just say if I talk to my direct report, well, guess what? I can go and add a tab in my Teams where I can say, add a one-on-one view. What the one-on-one view does, it actually shows me all the tasks I have with my direct reports. And I'll show you what it looks like because I have that installed right here. So when I go here, I have my direct report. And this is, again, inside Teams, inside a chat with an individual. And guess what? I can see exactly the status of all the tasks I have with my direct reports. When I manage 5 or 10 people, I don't have to go into Matrix. I don't have to go to another software to see what each of my direct reports are working on. I have one central place inside Teams, and then as I'm chatting with them or I'm on a call with them, I can just go through this list and I can talk about it really quickly. And not only that, you can see the tasks that are overdue as well, and whether or not they're updating those tasks. What's really useful here is when you have a one-on-one meeting, this happens all the time, right? And I'm sure you can attest to this. You have a one-on-one meeting, you talk about several things that you're going to do. 2 weeks later, you catch up and he's like, hey, by the way, did we make progress on those tasks? And then someone says, oh, I didn't write it down. Oh, we actually never captured that, right? Well, so Matrix takes away that excuse because from this view, when you have that one-on-one meeting, you can just add share task, boom, 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 directly from here. You don't have to leave Teams. When you add that share task, you can choose the project it belongs in. And even if you don't choose a project, it still tracks it in Matrix and what's called the inbox. And so from here, you can create those tasks. And as you're having that conversation, you're not distracted and you're not pulled out of context. And you can just create those tasks. And guess what? Both your coworker or your direct report, it's assigned to your direct report and it adds you as a follower to the task. So what that means is when that task gets updated, you will get alerted as well. But again, in this view, what I like about it is the ability for me to see the things that are overdue very, very easily. And I can just go down this list and I can reprioritize it, change the due date directly from here. The other thing I want to show you is that inside the chat with Teams as well, Matrix actually has these things called action cards. And so when you click on this ... you're able to go and open Matrix and send a Matrix task directly in the Teams conversation. This is very useful because I do this all the time, which is I assign a task to somebody in Matrix, but for some reason they didn't see it, right? So what I do is I just go back to Matrix or go back to Teams, open up Matrix here and send that task and say, hey, by the way, I don't know if you saw this, but this is some email that just came in. So instead of just referencing a task, instead of actually just referencing an email and say, did you see that email from so-and-so? You can actually pull up that email, pull up that task directly here inside Teams using Matrix. The other thing that's really neat too is when I talk to somebody in Microsoft Teams, actually literally this happened to me right before this webinar, which is I asked someone about the status of a certain task and he said, oh yeah, could you assign that to me? Well, guess what? When we talk about that in Teams, I can literally hover over this ellipsis and create PM item directly from this conversation. So what's really powerful about all of this is how little context switching I have to do. I can actually do all of these things within that conversation, and it's extremely seamless. And not only that, Matrix is very unique, where it actually links back to this particular moment in time when you had this conversation. Let me give you a use case. For example, you and your manager talked about a bunch of different things inside Teams, and then that involves several different tasks. Well, maybe these are actually really big goals that you want to tackle later. 6 months from now, you look back at that task in Matrix and you forgot the context. It's like, what were we talking about? Why did we do this? Well, Matrix allows you to open up that moment in time when you had that Teams conversation, and it tells you the context of everything around it. And so that's a really, really powerful capability directly here inside Teams. So leverage that. So with all this, I'm actually going to pull you back into Matrix because I want to make sure that at the end of this webinar here, you understand what are the things you can do right away to get the most out of Matrix. So what should you do? One, if you do use Microsoft Teams and Outlook, make sure you install our application. If you don't use Teams and Outlook, then you can use our web app. And then I would go and create several different projects. Make sure that you will have one project on your personal priorities. Make sure you have a project that you work with your coworker, right? Your manager, your direct reports, or whatever it is. And then from there, make sure that you actually write down the task and set the due dates on those tasks and prioritize them in the appropriate quadrants. If you did nothing else and on a weekly basis or whenever you have your team meeting, you just open up Matrix and you start comparing notes. If you only did that today, I guarantee you will have better team alignment than anything else that you've done prior. So Matrix is very, very effective as a communication tool for that purpose. Okay, so that's what I would recommend that you do. And then the other thing is really leverage that AI project management, because I feel like all of us, myself included, always have these personal goals or the goals that's in the back of our mind that we care about, that we want to tackle, but we never get to write it down because we're pulled away by so many other things. Again, things like how do I get a promotion, or how do I improve myself, or how do I get a raise? How do I negotiate a raise? Leverage Matrix to create some of those, and at least it'll remind you on tackling those tasks. So that's what I would do from Matrix standpoints. So if you don't do anything else, make sure you do that. Now, I want to show a few more really small features in Matrix just in case Some of you might be able to leverage this better than others. So as I mentioned to you, you have the matrix here. But on the top here, you actually have the ability to see the task from several other angles, right? So for example, let's just say I have this project earlier where it's about upgrading the technology system. Well, here's the matrix, but I can actually go to the list view. And so you see Matrix generated all these tasks for me along with all the due dates. And actually, this is a very easy way for me to see what I should work on next at any point in time. And then if anything that's overdue, it turns red. Very easy to spot those. And then I have the calendar view, which actually goes and take all the tasks with due dates and actually show it in a calendar format so I can drag and drop them as needed. The Gantt chart, actually what it does is if you go and link tasks together, it will show you the timeline on progression on how and which tasks you should work on at any point in time. In fact, when you edit a task, you can actually go to the resource section and create dependencies between Matrix tasks. So then it'll build those Gantt charts for you. So this is helpful for project managers who wants to go and be able to export that for presentation. But what happens is Gantt charts tend to be way too complicated. It's too hard to use. And the reality is no one really digests that information except for the project managers themselves, right? And so with Matrix, we see that Gantt chart as just a very, very small subset that's visual communication. And so these different views in Matrix is all about taking those information and visualizing in different form based on whoever it is that you are, what job function you have, and what it is that you work on at any point in time. So check out those various capabilities inside Matrix. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to jump back to the presentation. And I want to just go back and talk about the basics of Matrix and why you were here today. Again, if you were here to tackle the problems of prioritization across the team, triaging emails, or just understanding what you need to work on, then I think I've shown you the capabilities in Matrix that help tackle each of those things. So one, sign up for Matrix and use our app in Teams and Outlook if applicable. Two, create those projects that I mentioned and then start populating them and going back and make sure that you mark them as done. So then you're actually making progress. And Matrix, use Matrix to create that communication dashboard so then you're always aligned. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to show that Matrix you have. Essentially, you don't even have to invite them to Matrix, but put it on the screen or just showing them your screen and say, hey, these are the priorities I have. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are the things we should move around? And then when you create action items in Matrix, I highly recommend due dates because it actually helps remind you on getting those things done. And then Matrix can actually track progress over time. And then just a general advice, ruthlessly prioritize. We don't have enough time and resources in our days to get everything done. And if you don't prioritize, then you're going to work on things that don't matter. So Matrix is all about making sure that you look at that. And again, everything goes in that quadrant 4. And then you really select only the things that matter and move them to quadrant 1 or quadrant 2, right? And then start getting rid of the other stuff. So one thing that I've seen is that some customers will get overwhelmed by just adding too many small things in Matrix. So if you use Matrix to track high impact tasks, you'll find a lot more value really quickly. And I can't emphasize the communication aspect of it enough because it's not just, the difference between a piece of paper and Matrix software is a piece of paper does not give you that history. A piece of paper does not give you a real-time status update as your teammates change priorities. And so Matrix is that real-time status. And so use that to your advantage. And then use Matrix to manage your individual goals. At the end of the day, while I talked a lot about teams and so forth, Matrix is about you as an individual. If it works well for you to manage your priorities, everything else will fall into place. So what success should look like? You have one central place to track all priorities, right? And so that includes your personal priorities, your team priorities, your organization priorities. Everyone on the team understands and are aligned on key tasks because if they're not aligned, they can go into Matrix, talk about it, move things around. And now, when you walk away, there's that famous saying, which is disagree, but commit. So then You can have all the discussion that you want about priorities and so forth, where things belong. But once you're done with that meeting and you walk away, everyone's on the same page. And you have to be, because Matrix has just one master copy. And then if you have repetitive procedures, templatize them, as I mentioned earlier, save them to template, and that'll save you so much time as well. So I have a lot of templates, especially on things that I do over and over again. And when I launch that, I just have the appropriate due dates set already. And then if you have important email, prioritize them. I use Matrix to prioritize a lot of emails, not every single one, because it's, there's some cases where I forward Matrix emails. I'm sorry, I forward emails into Matrix instead. But sometimes I use the add-in extension. But all of you have an inbox in Matrix, a special email address, and from that special email address, you can forward emails into it, and it'll create tasks. And so I love it when you're able to triage to the right people, because that helps a lot to ensure that everyone's on the same page. And so that's a reason why a lot of customers come to Matrix. And if you leverage that capability, I think you'll find it helpful. And that's all I have to say from a presentation standpoint. I'm going to go back to the webinar here and see if there's any questions that you have. If you have questions, now a great opportunity to ask me. At the same time, you can always send me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you. I have a question here that are tasks completed save in Matrix for future reference. Absolutely. Actually, Matrix provide a record of not just the tasks that are completed, but you can actually see tasks completed over time. You can actually run reports around that. And then the whole history of every action item is recorded as well. So we actually have customers in compliance space where they have to show that they got certain things done at a certain time. So that's really, really useful for those who need that for that purpose. But you can actually generate reports on the tasks that you've done. You can actually see sort of the equivalent of like the Facebook feed is what I call it, where you can see all the action items, who did what, when, etc. The question is, can other team members see an Outlook if an email has already been delegated or submitted to PM? That's a really interesting question. So what happens is, if you have one email address and you can go, and let me jump back into Outlook here, you can see that after I prioritize an email, there's a little tag here on Matrix. So if you have a shared inbox, so for example, let's just say everyone shares like a sales at or support at inbox address in your Outlook. What happens is when you prioritize that, it gets tagged here. And not only that, Matrix is intelligent enough where if you open up Matrix here, because I already have this task created, it actually goes and it does not show you capture this email. Instead, it shows you open the Matrix item. So we know that this email has already been prioritized, and it lets you, by clicking on this, it actually opens up the task itself. So the answer is yes, if you share an inbox. Now, if you don't share an inbox with another person, then of course they wouldn't see your email and they wouldn't know that email has been prioritized. But if you do share an inbox, this works. We also have capabilities for managing multiple inboxes using one Outlook add-in as well. So that's another separate thing. And if you need that capability, you can reach out to us. But as you can see here, when I click on this open item, you can see that it actually opened what's called the item details. That's very similar to what I showed you in the web app for the email. But if I go to resources, that email is uploaded here as an EML file. So then a coworker who doesn't have access to my inbox can actually open that EML file and then respond to that email. So again, use case, you get an email from a customer, and then you need a different team member to respond to it. You use Matrix to prioritize it, and then you can go and then they can take the look, open that email and respond to it. Or not only that, they can go to the chat section here and talk about it. And this happens to us internally all the time. We get an email from a customer, we need to prioritize it, but then we're talking about all sorts of other stuff related to the task for the customer. And that might be, hey, could you put together a presentation? Or could you investigate XYZ? And so what that allows us to do, Matrix allows me to do, is attach all that information here as well, as links or URLs. Again, that could link to SharePoint, or that could link to Google Docs, etc., directly from here, or other action items if you have an email that's a very, very big task. The one thing I do want to mention is that Protomatrix actually has a lot of other extensions as well. So if you go to Protomatrix, we actually have various connectors, that actually can pull information from Outlook, Jira, To-Do, Planner, Azure, DevOps, etc. And then if you use you want to use Protomatrix for customer email management, or I'm sorry, customer support management, or Zendesk integration is actually pretty good. And then we actually have Microsoft Edge as well as Chrome extension that allows you to take anything and attach it to an action item as well. So it's very similar to the email, where you take an email and convert it into a task, but Protomatrix allows you to take a lot of other types of information and put it in one central place. Hopefully that answered your questions in terms of whether or not you can see if an email has been delegated. Again, this visualization is very easy to spot, and actually you can see in a couple of different places. There's one thing I want to show you with relate to that, which is if you go to Protomatrix here, you have this option, and you go to settings, you have the ability to go and toggle whether or not you want to upload the email, whether or not you want to use the message of the email as part of the item notes, etc. Again, if you're delegating this to others, checking the settings is pretty useful. One thing I want to mention earlier with respect to an email is that you can forward an email to your Protomatrix inbox. And so if you have your Protomatrix inbox saved, which is what I do. So for example, and let me show you how to get your inbox right here. So if you go to Protomatrix here, and then you go to what's called your inbox, and you can think of inbox as action items that do not belong in a certain project yet, right? And so these are I actually do use the inbox quite often for tracking tasks that are sort of don't belong anywhere. I can't go and justify creating a project for it. So I would put that here. And so I can add some action items here, etc. But then every person, all of you with all your accounts in Protomatrix, has a secret inbox. You can copy this email address, go to Outlook, save it as a contact. What I save my contact at is called inbox Protomatrix. So then when I go back to Microsoft Outlook or Apple Mail or whatever, or Gmail even, Protomatrix allowed me to take any of those emails and forward it into the inbox, and it shows up right here. And then I can move this as needed. The neat thing about the inbox is, let's just say I copy this inbox address and I forward an email right into Protomatrix. If I forward this here, I can actually see here. I'll go back to here. See how I copy this address, and I paste that here. What happens is when I forward an email, I can actually say assign to Eugenia. I can say due in 2 weeks, etc., directly from the forwarded email as well. I use this capability almost on a daily basis, where I get an email and then I forward it to myself and I set a due date, especially for my personal tasks and so forth. Everything from an email from a promotional email or whatever it is that's relevant. Great, thank you for the questions. Are there any other questions? Can you open an Outlook email from Protomatrix without downloading it? So the answer is yes. Inside Teams, answer is no. The reason is it's actually not us, it's Teams itself that forces you to download the email. But if you use the web app or Windows or Mac app, etc., what happens is when you click on the email file, you just have to set it up so then your computer opens email file automatically. So that's all you have to do. So when you saw how when I created that task, you saw how we created that task in Protomatrix. From the email, it uploads the email. And so then when I go to here, for example, and let's just say if I go and open a task here, that email, when I click on that email, and on my Mac computer here, I've set it up where Outlook opens it, and that's all I have to do. But again, inside Teams, it's not possible to set that up just because of the way Teams is configured. But that's what the uploaded email is designed to do. So unfortunately, in some cases, that's a little bit inconvenient because you do have to download it and then open the email. But that's a limitation, again, on the operating system and not us. These are great questions. Thank you for asking them. As I mentioned, feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions, hi@affluence.com. I'd be happy to field those questions or forward them as needed. One of the things that we care about with Matrix here is that we help you prioritize your tasks, prioritize your email, and tackle those challenges around prioritizations. And so that's why Matrix is called Matrix. And so hopefully you find value out of that. And again, use it to communicate your priorities, use it to stay aligned with your coworkers and all that. And if you do find that you're able to identify a couple of projects that should be important, but they're not, and then vice versa, projects that you think are important, but they actually turn out not to be, then we would have saved you a ton of resources. So even if you have one simple matrix that tracks those critical things, I think you'll find value. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time today. Again, this webinar is recorded, and then we'll send this out afterwards. Thank you.